Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this breakfast session to discuss and agree on a few elements around sustaining local vaccines manufacturing in the region and in the continent. I'd like to now introduce to you Director Jerome Kim. Director Kim is the Director General of the International Vaccines Institute, a very well accomplished international expert when it comes to development, research and development of human vaccines. Prior to working at the International Vaccine Institute, Dr. Jerome served as the Principal Deputy at the US military. He is also currently an adjunct professor at the Department of Medicine at the Uniformed Service University of Health Sciences in Bethesda. I've come to know Dr. Kim as a passionate researcher when it comes to vaccines, and I'd like to hand over the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Luziola. Excellencies, colleagues, distinguished guests. I represent the International Vaccine Institute in this new initiative to try to use vaccine development projects to create the correct research and development ecosystem that will support sustainable manufacturing in Africa. Briefly about the International Vaccine Institute, we are a UN-chartered international organization with a mission to discover, develop, and deliver safe, effective, and affordable vaccines for global health. You can see from the map that IVI's sites and offices are distributed throughout the world, and you can see from the flags that there are 44 member states and WHO which are parties to the IVI treaty. IVI since 2015 has had a very strong track record of vaccine discovery with over 80 projects since 2015, over 100 projects in vaccine development, over 20 epidemiological and impact studies, and these are critical because if we want to work on new vaccines, we have to understand the burden of the diseases that these vaccines will prevent, because in the end, a vaccine is cost beneficial. And until we can show that to a country, not only to the Minister of Health, but to a Minister of Finance, then we are not going to be able to make the proper argument for the introduction of these life-saving technological innovations. But importantly, IVI differs from many organizations because even though we are an international organization, we've started 12 different tech transfers of 6 different vaccines to low and middle income country vaccine manufacturers around the world, and we'll give an example of that shortly. And over 5,000 people have been trained in various courses at IVI, most recently as a part of the WHO Korean Ministry of Health and Welfare Biotechnology Training Hub. These are some of the projects that are ongoing in Africa, and I'm not going to go into detail about them, but feel free to ask any of the IVI staff around the room about the work that we do in Africa. And it's not that important for me to emphasize why it's so critical for Africa to move from producing less than 1% of its own vaccines to producing 60%, the target set by PAVM earlier in the decade. The reasons for strengthening vaccine R&D for manufacturing in Africa are clear. Pandemic preparedness, tackling endemic diseases for which big high-income country vaccine manufacturers are not interested, and then also improving vaccine supply security, something we learned and was underlined over and over again during the COVID-19 pandemic. In order to solve these problems, in conjunction with the foundational work that Africa CDC has done through the Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacturing, IVI would like to advance the concept known as Advancing Vaccine End-to-End Capabilities in Africa, which we refer to as AVEC Africa, which we hope to build capacity and sustainability in the vaccine ecosystem in Africa. What it does is it looks across the entire value chain, the way IVI would as we develop a vaccine. So many of you have heard about the multiple cholera outbreaks in Africa. The IVI vaccine, the oral cholera vaccine developed at IVI, tech transferred to multiple companies around the world, represents 95% of the supply used to stop these outbreaks throughout the continent. And so as we think about a vaccine, we don't just think about manufacturing the vaccine. We think about the laboratory that creates it, the people who do the clinical testing, the regulators who approve it, the organizations like the World Health Organization Strategic Advisory Group of Experts that make recommendations for the use of vaccine, Gavi, which helps to provide the stockpile of oral cholera vaccine, and the ultimate national cholera control plans that countries are putting forward. IVI thinks across the spectrum, and unless we can do that, vaccine manufacturing by itself will not accomplish anything. We have to think about having the people and the capabilities in the ecosystem in order to sustain manufacturing in the end, and that's what AVIC Africa is. The Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacturing was critical in this because of the 8 strategic frameworks. The AVIC Africa deals with 4 of them. All of those areas around the end-to-end research and development and utilization of vaccines within the continent. As we say, going from the need for a vaccine to the impact as we use the vaccine correctly. This just gives an example of a vaccine, which you see on the top from epidemiology, lab research and discovery, vaccine development, vaccine registration, vaccine commercial manufacturing, and access, uptake, and delivery are the things in the vaccine value chain. And you can see how the oral cholera vaccine, in this case the simplified version, which was developed with funding from Gates in collaboration with the Korean company U-Biologics, created something that could be technology transferred successfully to BioVac. And BioVac has now accepted the tech transfer and is in the process of scaling it up. And if this is successful, it will be the first vaccine made from scratch, made from the start at BioVac. And we think that this is a very, very important proof of concept that we can do things here, that it is possible to transfer vaccine technology and successfully manufacture vaccines in Africa. So, reminding you again, AVIC Africa is critical. It is something about creating an ecosystem for research and development that sustains vaccine manufacturing, but not only that, thinks about regulating the vaccines, about approving vaccines, about the utilization of vaccines and recommendations for use, and ultimately about the procurement, uptake, and implementation of vaccines, so that in the end, vaccination does its job, which is to prevent disease, infectious diseases impact. Thank you very much.
I'd like now to take this opportunity to ask the DG of the Africa CDC, Dr. Jean Kaseya, to come and address us. Dr. Kaseya is a passionate champion for local manufacturing, and we've really benefited from the advice and this passion that he keeps on passing on to us. So Dr. Kaseya, please address the audience.
His Excellency President William Ruto, President of Kenya, His Excellency Brahim Ghali, President of Sahrawi Republic, His Excellency Mohamed Al-Meneifi, President of Libya, His Excellency Hamed Ashani, Prime Minister of Tunisia, my sister, the Commissioner Minata, my sister, Minister of Health of Kenya, Susan Wafula. I see a number of other ministers here. I recognize the Minister of Côte d'Ivoire, the State Minister of Rwanda, and maybe others somewhere. Let me also recognize the Director General of IVI, Jerome Kim. Good morning to all of you, and thank you for joining us as co-hosts of this event today. It's a Sunday morning, but all of us, we agreed and commit to be here to celebrate this event. There is one person missing here. It's José Manuel Barroso, who is the chair of the Gavi board, who came to give us the good news. And I thank President Ruto, who decided to dedicate some time to meet with José Manuel Barroso, because he's leading this 1 billion initiative called AMA to strengthen local manufacturing capacity in Africa. The local manufacturing agenda is a critical agenda for me as Director General Africa CDC. I have to call it the second independence of Africa, because we are talking not only about the health security, we are talking about our economic growth, we are talking about job creation, we are talking about peace and security. For this reason, despite all challenges that we had, we managed to move with the program that Africa CDC created called Partnerships for African Vaccine Manufacturing. We had a lot of success with this program that aiming to achieve at least 60% of vaccines used in Africa manufactured in Africa. But because we are serious with this agenda of local manufacturing, there are a number of decisions that will be approved today. The first one, a critical one. You cannot manage a such agenda without a champion. This is why Africa CDC, taking our responsibility, we went to meet President Ruto and to suggest him to accept to be our champion. And President, thank you for accepting to be our champion. You'll be approved today by the AU Assembly. The second one, the mandate that was given to Africa CDC was vaccine. We decided, with support from our board and the Committee of Head of State of Africa CDC, to submit today to the AU Assembly to upgrade PAVM to a platform for all health commodities, including vaccines, medicines, diagnostics, and any other supplies. Then President Ruto, you will not lead a local manufacturer for vaccine, you lead a local manufacturer for all medical countermeasures. The market of around $80 billion per year in Africa. We are not talking just about one aspect. We are talking about the full spectrum of the program, running from research and development, clinical trials, capacity building, manufacturing, financing, but also two other important aspects, regulatory process and market. This is what we call end-to-end project development. We are moving with this agenda. In September, we organized in Morocco a meeting with a number of partners, member states, national regulatory authorities, and UN partners, including WHO and UNICEF, to discuss about the understanding of local manufacturing for vaccines in Africa. In November, we launched the Vaccine Manufacturing and Research and Development Competency Frameworks that will guide the outline on how we have to develop the necessary workforce and skills in Africa. In December, we came to launch the AVMA, African Vaccine Manufacturing. We got approval of AVMA, African Vaccine Manufacturing Accelerator. This is a $1 billion initiative from Gavi to support local manufacturing in Africa. That initiative will be launched in June in Paris, and it will be co-hosted by Africa CDC and the government of France, and we hope that our champions will bring a number of head of states there. A few days ago, Africa CDC, we together with AUDA, NEPAD, and WHO, we organized a meeting to understand the complexity of the issue of WHO pre-qualification. Please let me be clear on that. We can manufacture our vaccines without WHO pre-qualification, it's dead. We have only one African company manufacturing vaccine with the WHO pre-qualification. This is not acceptable. We have only one African company manufacturing syringes with WHO pre-qualification, and I thank the President and Minister giving me opportunity to visit Revital Healthcare in Kenya. This is the only African company manufacturing syringes with WHO PQ. We need to stop it. This is why we took this initiative to bring the world in Africa CDC to discuss the WHO pre-qualification issue. And we are moving with this agenda. Excellency, we can do everything. Without market, we are nowhere. We have a market of 1.4 billion people. Today, we want to count on your support to have a pool procurement mechanism for Africa. This is one of the conditionalities for us to have a healthy program. Without the pool procurement mechanism, Africa will not sell to Africa. And that one, we as Africans, we cannot stop it. We need to support that. I want also to be clear, end-to-end project development is under the leadership of Africa CDC. Partners are supporting some component. Africa CDC is working with African Union Commission, and the commissioner is there, is working with AUDANEPAD, is working with FCFTA to make sure that this end-to-end project development is a reality.
Excellencies, allow me to introduce to you His Excellency Ambassador Minata Samate. She is the Commissioner for Health, Humanitarian and Social Development. And she's going to talk about, to give some remarks around the African Union Health Strategy to cover both manufacturing, but also broadly to explain to us what these key pillars are. So Ambassador, please welcome.
Excellence, je vais aller en français. Excellence, Monsieur William Ruto, président de la République du Kenya et champion du local manufacturing. Merci, Excellence, pour votre invitation et la tenue de cette importante réunion. Excellence, Monsieur Brahim Ghali, président de la République arabe sahraoui. Excellence, Monsieur le Docteur Mohamed Al-Messi, président de la Libye. Excellence Ahmed Achini, Premier ministre de la République tunisienne. Monsieur Jérôme Kim, DG de International Vaccine Institute, Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres présents dans la salle, chers frères Jean Kasseya, DG de CDC Afrique, distinguées personnalités présentes dans cette salle. C'est un honneur pour moi de m'adresser à vos excellences aujourd'hui, en particulier sur le thème des soins de santé et de la fabrication des vaccins dans le cadre de la stratégie africaine 2016-2030. Cette question, vous conviendrez avec moi, Excellences, Messieurs les chefs d'État, distinguées personnalités, a une importance capitale pour notre continent. C'est pour ça que l'Union africaine n'est pas restée en dehors de cette situation et a élaboré une stratégie dans ce sens. La stratégie africaine de santé est un cadre visionnaire qui harmonise nos efforts pour relever les défis sanitaires auxquels notre continent est confronté. Cette stratégie, mesdames et messieurs, met l'accent sur la couverture sanitaire universelle, l'équité en matière de santé et de la résilience pour nos populations africaines. Elle vise essentiellement à garantir que chaque citoyen africain ait accès à des services de santé complets et de qualité. En outre, cette stratégie adopte une approche holistique en matière de santé en mettant l'accent sur les déterminants sociaux de la santé, en reconnaissant l'interconnexion entre la santé, l'éducation, d'ailleurs qui est le thème de l'année pour l'année 2024, l'éducation, la réduction de la pauvreté et pour un développement durable, un développement économique en Afrique. Cette perspective intégrative en matière de santé est d'une importance pour nous dans nos programmes de développement qui doit être inclusif, durable et au bénéfice de l'ensemble des citoyens africains. Dans le cadre de cette stratégie, nous avons défini des domaines clés, des domaines d'action pour faire avancer notre programme en matière de santé. Il s'agit notamment du renforcement de nos systèmes de santé dont la faiblesse est reconnue par tous, de la promotion de la prévention et du contrôle des maladies, sans oublier l'amélioration des soins de santé primaires, l'accélération de la recherche et de l'innovation pour un développement en matière de santé. Nous reconnaissons qu'il nous faut un partenariat, une collaboration et le renforcement des capacités pour soutenir nos infrastructures sanitaires pour des soins de santé sur l'ensemble de notre continent. Il s'agit aussi pour nous de concrétiser la souveraineté en matière de santé en Afrique. Il est important également de mentionner que la déclaration d'Addis Abeba sur la vaccination adoptée en 2016 met l'accent sur l'accès universel de la vaccination. Vous conviendrez avec moi, lorsque nous avons eu la pandémie du coronavirus, l'Afrique a été la dernière à bénéficier de vaccins. Cette question des vaccins est une pierre angulaire pour le développement de notre continent. La vaccination de routine, et cela nous paraît vraiment important parce que sans vaccination de routine, il sera difficile pour nous d'atteindre nos objectifs en matière de développement parce que si nous sommes malades, nos enfants sont malades, il sera difficile pour eux de contribuer au développement. Il faut que cette vaccination, dans toutes nos formations sanitaires, permette à la population d'accéder à des vaccins de qualité. Cette belle initiative, fabrication durable des vaccins, nous permettra de contribuer à diminuer de manière significative la prévalence de maladies évitables et la vaccination contre certaines maladies qui continuent de tuer. Je citerai la tuberculose, entre autres, diphtérie, tétanos, poliomyélite et toutes les maladies sur le continent africain qui nécessitent des vaccins et qui peuvent être évités. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs les chefs d'État, je ne peux m'empêcher de parler de l'Agence africaine du médicament. Comme vous le savez, cette agence a été adoptée par vos excellences, les chefs d'État et de gouvernement, et cette agence a un rôle essentiel dans l'harmonisation des normes réglementaires sur le continent, la promotion de la collaboration entre nos États membres, parce que si des pays produisent, il faut collaborer, échanger. C'est pour ça qu'il y a un lien aussi avec la zone de libre-échange qui permettra aux vaccins sur le continent de circuler, des vaccins de qualité. Et cela permet également aux citoyens d'accéder à des produits de qualité. L'Afrique est infestée de faux médicaments, de faux vaccins, ce qui est inacceptable pour nous-mêmes et pour nos populations. À ma témoigne de votre engagement et excellence, Mesdames et Messieurs les chefs d'État, les ministres, l'AMA est d'une importance. C'est pour cela qu'on a vu un engagement de l'ensemble des États membres pour son opérationnalisation et nous espérons dans les mois à venir que l'agence soit opérationnelle et nous travaillons pour cela. Le partenariat nous permet également important pour la fabrication des vaccins en Afrique, pour nous accompagner aussi. C'est une manifestation aussi du renforcement de la coopération avec les partenaires. C'est en cela que je remercie tous les partenaires qui sont avec nous aujourd'hui. Il nous faut renforcer nos capacités locales dans ce domaine et réduire notre dépendance. Ça, c'est une triste réalité. Nous sommes dépendants de plusieurs sources extérieures en matière de vaccins. Il s'agit, si nous produisons sur le continent, en cela je félicite les pays qui fabriquent déjà sur le continent parce que ça garantit justement l'accès aux vaccins de manière rapide au niveau de nos populations. Mesdames et messieurs, j'invite l'ensemble des partenaires, vos engagements, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres, les chefs d'État. Il s'agit pour nous de renforcer la coopération entre pays africains avec nos partenaires pour atteindre nos objectifs. C'est à ce prix que nous allons faire progresser la fabrication de vaccins en renforçant notre riposte face aux défis actuels et jeter ainsi les bases d'infrastructures sanitaires plus résilientes et autosuffisantes sur le continent. Je tiens pour terminer à dire merci à son Excellence, Monsieur le Président Ruto, et à l'ensemble des chefs d'État et des ministres qui sont présents dans la salle et les partenaires. C'est ensemble que nous allons justement faire avancer l'agenda de la vaccination et particulièrement sur le continent africain. Nous souhaitons que cette coopération puisse continuer. Et merci beaucoup pour l'occasion qui nous a été donnée de m'adresser à vos excellences, les chefs d'État et les ministres présents dans la salle. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Ambassador. I'd like to take this opportunity to invite the Cabinet Secretary, Ministry of Health, Republic of Kenya, to make her remarks. And just to say, the Cabinet Secretary is passionate about universal health coverage, which includes making available vaccines for children.
Your Excellencies, my colleague ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I want to take this opportunity to warmly welcome you to this side event that is co-hosted by the Republic of Kenya, the Africa CDC, and the IVI Institute. Your presence here this morning, Your Excellencies, is a testament to the commitment that you have towards Africa attaining the new public health order pillar on expanded manufacturing of vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics. Your Excellencies, the case for local manufacturing has been made. We all went through COVID. We know what it did to us, especially on the supply chain of health products. So the case has been made, and our presence here is really to ensure that we accelerate our commitment towards achieving local manufacturing, achieving self-sustainability on health products and technologies. Your Excellencies, local manufacturing for vaccines is a complex that requires all of us to put our efforts together, that requires a continental effort, that requires regional efforts to ensure that we put together our governments, we put together our regulators, we put together our research and development institutions, our supply chain and logistics experts, and institute pooled procurement for economies of scale and scope to ensure that we are able to take care of our people when we get into pandemic situations, as and when they happen. And considering the complexities involved in this venture, we need all the regional and continental collaborative efforts. Your Excellencies, Kenya has made some strides, and now we have our Kenya Biovax Institute that was established to drive local manufacturing for vaccines. We begin with fill and finish for all vaccines, and especially the childhood immunization vaccines. And the driving force behind this is His Excellency the President. And we are committed to achieving universal health coverage by ensuring that our own health products and technologies is assured through local manufacturing. Indeed, the success of vaccine manufacturing initiative is predicated on a regional approach to ensure sustainability and supporting the continental harmonization of efforts in the areas of regulatory affairs, research and development, and most importantly, the workforce development that is required. I welcome you all to this side event with the hope that the commitment by our heads of states and government will amplify the rallying call for vaccine manufacturing capacity through building end-to-end project-driven vaccine initiatives while emphasizing the need for a self-sufficient and sustainable vaccine ecosystem in Africa. I would now like to take this opportunity to invite our head of state, His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, Honorable Dr. William Samoei Ruto, to give his remarks. Welcome, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, Minister. Your Excellencies, Ministers present, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to this event. I'm truly delighted that this Sunday morning we have the opportunity to have a very important conversation. A conversation that touches on a very important subject. And I take this very early opportunity to sincerely thank the Director General of the International Vaccine Institute, my friend Dr. Jerome Kim, and his entire team, for the consistent commitment and support for the implementation of the third strategic pillar of the new public health order, the Africa Union's framework for action. This pillar aims to deliver the continent's health security agenda by focusing on expanding the manufacturing of vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics. The COVID-19 pandemic, ladies and gentlemen, laid bare the grave vulnerabilities inherent in our global healthcare system, graphically exposing glaring inequalities in access to life-saving diagnostics, medicines, and vaccines. This unacceptable situation has been worsened by the arbitrary and unequal distribution of supplies, vaccine nationalism that we saw, and our continent's over-reliance on external sources to mount an effective response to an existential global crisis. I urge you to also recall the Mpox, formerly known as the monkeypox crisis, which plagued Africa during the pandemic in 2020, yet received no international attention until cases began to spread beyond our continent. Only then did vaccines become available, even though for 4 years later, not a single dose of the vaccine has reached Africa. You all agree that is not acceptable anymore in 2024. This time, the time has come for the African Union member states to take bold and decisive steps in implementing homegrown solutions to our health security challenges. As regards vaccines, we must build a holistic ecosystem incorporating the entire value chain all the way from research and development to clinical trials, local production, as well as efficient distribution and delivery. Strong political will and commitment is necessary to intensify and sustain investment in healthcare infrastructure, in human capital, and in institutional frameworks, including regulation, legislation, and other necessary frameworks that will enable these to go forward. And I want to thank my colleague, the President of South Africa, President Ramaphosa, for leading the charge on behalf of our continent on this subject of vaccines. Consequently, Kenya is committed to working in close collaboration with our valued partners, including the Africa Union Commission, Africa CDC, the Africa Medicines Agency, the World Health Organization, IVI, and other regional and international stakeholders. As members of the Africa Union, we must seize this opportunity to accelerate and create an enabling environment for vaccine manufacturing in our continent by mobilizing adequate resources, sharing knowledge, expertise, technology, and also sharing best practice. I stand here to confirm to you that you can count on Kenya to translate this commitment into decisive actions and feasible results in the coming months. Even as we speak to collaborate and as we seek to collaborate and forge partnership to develop our vaccine production capacity, we must not lose sight of our fundamental strategic goal, which is the achievement of vaccine and healthcare sovereignty. Africa must therefore begin to liberate itself from the dependency on donor-funded mechanisms, and AU member states must significantly accelerate efforts to develop a self-reliant, self-sufficient vaccine production sector for sustainable access to routine as well as outbreak vaccinations. In turn, it is necessary for African leaders to mobilize adequate investment in local vaccine industries, which entail the removal of drawbacks, including intellectual property obstacles to manufacturing, trade barriers, and supply chain constraints. We must also promote equitable vaccine distribution globally based on the need to save lives, not greed for profit. And let me specifically, as we have this conversation about local manufacture, I know my friend Jean Kaseya has said that I have agreed to champion the manufacture of pharmaceutical commodities in our continent. He didn't give me a choice to say no. And before I said yes, he announced that I had said yes. But I understand the necessity of this moment and the urgency of what we need to do. In Kenya alone, we import $1 billion every year of pharmaceutical commodities. That speaks volumes of how much foreign exchange we ship out of our country, and it also starkly brings into focus the opportunities that we lose. But let me give you three, for those of you who maybe think that we are far off from this. What we are discussing here is a reality that we can make happen. Just last week, with the government of Japan, we agreed to expand Kenya Medical Research Institute, a Kenyan institute that participated in the clinical trials of the COVID vaccine, meaning that we have capacity in Kenya and in Africa for research that is necessary as part of the ecosystem required for not just vaccine manufacture, but for pharmaceutical manufacture. So if there was any doubt as to whether we have the capacity to underwrite the required research capabilities, the fact that African institutes like Kenya Medical Research Institute participated in the clinical trials of the COVID vaccine demonstrates that that capacity is resident in Africa. Number two, Kaseya here has mentioned about Revital Pharmaceutical Company, a Kenyan company that today manufactures pharmaceutical products and exports those pharmaceutical products not just to our region, but globally, including the United States, Colombia, and other countries, meaning that it is possible for our continent with proper focus for us not to just manufacture for our consumption, but we can turn this into manufacture for a global market. Again, it speaks to the capabilities that we have. And therefore, I want to confirm here that Kenya is ready on both fronts. We have already signed the agreement for Moderna to set up the first COVID vaccine manufacturer in Africa, in Kenya. It is a $500 million investment, and we are going to expand this not to just be a COVID vaccine manufacture facility, but vaccine manufacture facility for all the other vaccines that are required, and hopefully we can take this further into other commodities. Finally, we have already established, knowing very well that we need the pharmaceutical commodities to be produced in our continent. We already have a special economic zone that is going to provide the necessary environment for pharmaceutical companies who want to set up. And I want to ask those in this room and elsewhere who are looking for an opportunity that there exists an opportunity for a $1 billion market in Kenya and possibly a $50 billion market in Africa. And you have an opportunity to set this up in Kenya. We have a special economic zone ready that you can manufacture for local consumption in Kenya and for our region. Again, realizing the importance of us building the capabilities and the necessary environment for us to produce pharmaceutical products locally. Further, local production of vaccines makes it feasible to ensure equity in distribution among member states, bearing in mind that no one is safe until everyone is safe. It is crucial to ensure that vaccines are available and accessible to all without exclusion or discrimination, regardless of nationality, wealth, or social status. I'm encouraged by our manifest resolve as African leaders to seize this moment, reimagine, and transform the future of healthcare in Africa by building a resilient, equitable, and sustainable manufacturing ecosystem that serves the vaccine needs of our continent and its people. Let us work together so that posterity remembers our generation for the boldness of our vision, firmness of our conviction, results of our action, and impact of our achievements. Together, we have a chance to ensure that Africa is prepared to face the complex challenges of today and a healthy and prosperous future for generations that come after us. Our commitment to achieve this self-sufficiency by establishing a holistic continental ecosystem of vaccine production capacity, including pharmaceutical capabilities, is anchored by the target we have set for ourselves, that by 2040, 60% of vaccines used in Africa shall be locally manufactured. We have less than 2 decades to go. This leaves us with no chance but to accelerate what must be done. Today, therefore, we are here to shift gears and go further, faster, together to make health security a public good in Africa. I thank you. Let me take this opportunity to request my brother, the President of Libya, to come and make his remarks. Mr. President.
Thank you, my brother. Excuse me, I will speak in Arabic. فخامة الرئيس ويليام روتورو رئيس جمهورية كينيا، أصحاب الفخامة رؤساء الدول والحكومات، السيدات والسادة، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أود في البداية أن أشيد بجهودكم فخامة الرئيس على تنظيم هذا الحدث الهام المتعلق بموضوع اللقاحات والصناعات الدوائية، ولا يفوتنا أيضا الإشادة بدور الاتحاد الأفريقي ومؤسساته، خاصة المركز الأفريقي للوقاية من الأمراض ومكافحتها، ووكالة الأدوية الأفريقية. وفي الوقت نفسه الذي نتطلع فيه إلى تفعيلها بشكل كامل لتقوم بوظيفتهما في تحقيق الأمن الصحي والطبي والدوائي وتوطين صناعة اللقاحات في القارة. كما اسمحوا لي أن أتقدم بالتهنئة للدول الأعضاء التي تم اختيارها ضمن الدول المصنعة للقاحات من قبل منظمة الصحة العالمية على هامش قمة الاتحاد الأفريقي الاتحاد الأوروبي المنعقدة في فبراير 2022، ونعرب عن دعمنا الكامل لكافة الجهود التي ستمكن أفريقيا من الحصول على فرص في نقل وتوطين المعرفة والتكنولوجيا المصنعة للقاحات والأدوية، تلك الفرص التي تعد حقا مكتسبا لها، الأمر الذي من شأنه تمهيد الطريق للجانب الأفريقي سواء في المشاركة خبراته السابقة أو اكتساب خبرات جديدة يشمل ذلك تطوير الصناعات الدوائية القائمة أو توطين الجديد منها، ودعم المؤسسات الصحية والطبية الأفريقية المسؤولة على الرعاية الصحية الأولية، ومكافحة الأوبئة والأمراض ومراكز التي تم استحداثها لمجابهة الجوائح والأمراض المستوطنة، وهو ما سيمكن القارة من احتواء أي انتشار مستجد للأوبئة برفع درجات الاستجابة العاجلة. لقد تعرضت أفريقيا ومناطق أخرى من جنوب العالم لامتحان صعب أثناء انتشار جائحة كوفيد-19 نتيجة احتكار اللقاحات وصعوبة الحصول عليها بأسعار اقتصادية وبطرق ميسرة. إن من أولويات أجندة أفريقيا 2063 وأجندة التنمية المستدامة 2030 تحقيق الأمن الصحي الذي يتوجب الوصول إليه بإمكانيات القارة الذاتية أو بالمشاركة والمسؤولية المتبادلة وليس كصدقة. السيد الرئيس، نتطلع أن يكون اجتماعنا هذا فرصة للتعبير عن الإرادة السياسية القارية، ليس فقط في دعم إنجاح جهود الدول الأعضاء الرائدة في صناعة اللقاحات التي تم اختيارها ضمن جهود دعم القارة فحسب، بل أيضا التأكيد على أن الاعتماد على عدد قليل من الشركات التي تحتكر إنتاج اللقاحات وتوفيرها في السوق العالمي يعد أمرا غير مقبول، ويجب أن يسمح للدول الأفريقية بالوصول إلى تكنولوجيا إنتاج اللقاحات وأن تساهم في إنتاج والتوزيع وأن تكون أفريقيا بالنظر لوزنها الديمغرافي شريكا في صياغة اقتصادات الصناعات الدوائية والخدمات الطبية. إن المبادرات والهياكل القارية المتمثلة في إطلاق مؤسسات تمويل أفريقية سيهيئ فرص متعددة للمبادرين في هذا المجال. لقد كان لبلاد ليبيا تجربة مبكرة في مجال الصناعات الدوائية لم تنجح في الاستمرار نتيجة اعتمادها على تقنيات مستوردة، مما حد من فرص استمرارها وتحولها إلى صناعة اقتصادية. وإننا على ثقة كاملة بأن أفريقيا أصبحت أكثر وعياً بأزماتها وأكثر تصميماً على تجاوزها في هذا المجال ومجالات أخرى. شكراً جزيلاً.
I would now want to take this opportunity to invite His Excellency Ahmed Hachari, Head of Government of Tunisia. Welcome, Your Excellency.
Bonjour à tous, Vos Excellences. Je pense au président du Kenya, au président de la Libye, qui est un pays qui nous est très cher en Tunisie. J'aurais aimé, en fait, qu'il y ait un vaccin pour avoir un peu plus d'oxygène. Parce que lorsqu'on est à 2500 mètres d'altitude, j'ai remarqué au bout de 2 jours que j'en manquais un peu. Mais bon, ça passera. En vérité, moi je ne m'y connais pas beaucoup en la matière. Il reste que je connais certaines personnes qui sont versées dans le milieu de la pharmacie, du médicament et des vaccins. Je ne vous cacherai pas qu'au fond, je m'y connais un peu, du fait que mon épouse elle-même est pharmacienne. Bon, c'est un petit mensonge du matin. Je voulais vous parler de la Tunisie et de son passé assez riche en matière de vaccins. Sachez que depuis la première décennie du siècle dernier, la Tunisie fabrique des vaccins de tout genre sur la coqueluche, la typhoïde, le choléra, la diphtérie. Et c'est l'Institut Pasteur qui depuis 1922, vous vous rendez compte, depuis 1922, avait été déjà chargé de la fabrication ainsi que du stockage des vaccins. Au point que, moi lorsque j'avais lu ça, ça m'avait un peu étonné. Mais telle est la vérité. Au point que, en 1928, l'Institut Pasteur de Tunis avait reçu le prix Nobel. Et donc, l'aventure a continué au niveau de l'Institut Pasteur, qui produit tous les vaccins que je vous ai cités, et qui n'a pas cessé d'évoluer en la matière. Elle a même été sollicitée et elle a fait pour un transfert de technologie en faveur de la Corée, la Turquie, l'Égypte et j'en passe. Et elle a même été contactée pour les sérums thérapeutiques par l'Éthiopie et le Maroc, qui est un pays frère également. En Tunisie, l'Institut Pasteur, c'est le seul fabricant de vaccins et de sérums. et il ne fait qu'augmenter ses capacités. Sa renommée et sa crédibilité sont tellement importants qu'il a été choisi par l'OMS parmi 6 pays, dont le Kenya d'ailleurs, afin de bénéficier d'un transfert de technologie pour les vaccins messagers ARN. C'est pour vous dire qu'en la matière, l'Afrique peut compter sans aucun problème sur le savoir-faire de la Tunisie qu'elle a acquis depuis disons des années, je ne dirais pas très longues, mais depuis plus de 100 ans maintenant. Il est vrai que, excusez-moi, là voilà. Il est vrai que dans le domaine de la santé et de la pharmacie, la Tunisie, depuis longtemps, a beaucoup investi. Par exemple, dans les institutions universitaires. Il y a beaucoup il y a de nombreuses institutions universitaires en Tunisie, ce qui fait que en matière de technologie, elle ne fait qu'évoluer. Au point que d'ailleurs, et là c'est un mal dont souffrent de nombreux pays africains. Je vais déborder un peu. Nous formons de très hauts potentiels. Il n'y a pas que la Tunisie, hein, mais notamment la Tunisie. On forme de très hauts potentiels, notamment des médecins et des pharmaciens, biologistes, et j'en passe. Bon, je ne parlerai pas des ingénieurs et autres, mais qui s'en vont. Ils s'en vont en Europe en général. Donc la Tunisie a des pas d'avance en la matière. Elle compte à peu près 120 entreprises qui opèrent dans les maillons de la chaîne de valeur dans le domaine, hein, dont plus de 33 dans la production des médicaments. Et plusieurs success stories nationales et champions internationaux ont émergé ces dernières années, contribuant à faire de la Tunisie l'un des principaux hubs du continent africain. Sachant que le chiffre d'affaires du marché en la matière, déjà en 2022, s'est élevé à plus d'1 milliard de dollars. Moi, j'ai l'habitude de ne pas user de la langue de bois. La Tunisie, c'est un pays ancien et neuf. Notre langage a beaucoup évolué. Donc, j'utilise le langage de la raison. Ce que je vous dis, c'est qu'il faut que l'Afrique compte sur elle-même. Nous sommes tous des partenaires. Il faut qu'on s'entraide. Et je vous assure qu'on a des potentialités en la matière. Donc, la Tunisie est à côté de tous nos pays africains. Elle est à côté de tous ses voisins. Et tous ensemble, au niveau du continent, je vous assure qu'on peut faire des miracles. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
So for us to have a sustainable manufacturing, we need to ensure that the vaccines that we're manufacturing, we're producing, are up to the standards. Once you get the standard quality products, then it won't be a big issue for us to access the international market. So we have been working on strengthening the regulatory ecosystem on the continent. Another one, why we're here today, is R&D. So for us to have independence and sustainability in manufacturing, we should not be always dependent on tech transfer. So investing in R&D, be it upstream, discovery, or clinical, that's the way to go. That will ensure sustainability of manufacturing in the continent. And the other one is infrastructure. We have to make sure that the raw materials and input materials for vaccine manufacturing are accessible to African vaccine manufacturers. You may have fantastic facility with a clear goal, everything put in place, but if you don't have the supplies, the raw materials, the input materials, then success is under question mark. Tech transfer, for the foreseeable future, we will be dependent, we will be focusing on tech transfer, so that before our vaccines, the vaccines that we develop come to existence, we will have to depend on tech transferring. So we have to make sure that our manufacturing facilities are ready to receive technology. Finance, I don't have to explain it to you. It's again a crucial, bold program that we want to work on and facilitate. So, and then overall, in order to really lead vaccine manufacturing, support manufacturers in the continent, we have a central role of agenda setting and coordination. So Africa CDC is here, working closely with partners, setting agenda for manufacturers, and coordinating manufacturing in the continent. Next slide, please. So we have been hearing from different speakers in this forum and previously that many countries in Africa want to have vaccine manufacturing facility in their territories. So the question now is, how are we aligned, coordinated, so that we don't repeat something that's happening next door? So that we have a very coordinated ecosystem where some manufacturing facilities focus on one part of the value chain, others focus on another value chain. We don't have to end up in a situation where all manufacturers do fill and finish. So again, that will make us vulnerable and dependent. So for that, last year, we brought together member states who have manufacturing facility in their territories and manufacturers in one room. The idea is for them to openly have an open conversation in terms of what they are planning to do and how it's aligned with their neighbors, their colleagues, other member states on the continent. And then together with our partners, we have done a mapping exercise of what is happening on the continent in terms of vaccine manufacturing. Which vaccines, in what platform, what value chain, where, and the capacity. So we have done that analysis. Why? Because we need to avoid duplication. We need to get manufacturers aligned. And then we have successfully collaborated with Gavi, as DG mentioned this morning, and the Gavi board approved AVMA, African Vaccine Manufacturing Accelerator. It's a financing mechanism that will support African vaccine manufacturers to produce Gavi vaccines on the continent. So for this to happen, we need to have a sustainable market, and we need to understand what's going on the continent. Next slide, please. So we have done this mapping exercise. What's going on, where? Which vaccines, in which facilities, what's the plan, how many doses will be produced, what year. And that gave us a very clear understanding of how the ecosystem is evolving on the continent. Next slide, please. So just for the sake of keeping the confidentiality, I just blacked out the names of manufacturers here. So we have clearly understood that the different manufacturing initiatives on the continent, 24 of them, are at different stages in very different timelines. We have manufacturers at very early phase. They are in development stage, setup. We have manufacturers where setup is completed and ready to take transferring. We have another set of manufacturers who we think will come to the market pretty much soon. In a couple of years, in 3 years, 2 years, 4 years, 5 years. And we know which vaccines are under these categories. So now the question is, how can we focus on the vaccines that are coming to the market in the near future, in the medium term, and in the long run? Because the kind of support, the kind of coordination they need is different. So, next slide, please. Here are the vaccines that are coming pretty much soon in terms of manufacturing on the continent for the continental market. So we have IPV, we have OCV, PCV, meningitis, yellow fever, of course, and MR. So again, now we know how to steer the wheel so that we focus supporting these vaccines to make it to the finish line. The finish line for us is having market, access to market, being able to pass the regulatory requirement and enter into the market. So the reason is that we don't afford to fail. If we fail here, then it will be very difficult to recover. It will be very difficult for those upstream to come to this level. So we should be very clear in terms of what these vaccine manufacturers need, what kind of support they need, how they should be coordinated, and so on. So as a continental organization, Africa CDC will be focusing on ensuring these vaccines reach the market, reach the finish line, and then give them a predictable market so that they will have sustainable vaccine manufacturing and they will be integrated to the ones who are coming later. Speaking of R&D, if you're supporting drug substance manufacturing, then R&D is inevitable. So our R&D will be focusing on supporting those vaccines, drug substance, to be produced in the continent, trialed in the continent, approved by the regulatory authorities both in the continent and globally, and then entering into the market. Next slide, please. So, and then, as much as we have the vaccines that are ready for the continental market, we do have also vaccines that are being produced or will be produced pretty much soon for domestic use. So these vaccines, as you can see, a list of vaccines, they are ready to enter into the market for domestic use in their territories. So again, these vaccines need to be coordinated, this manufacturing, with the rest of the manufacturing facilities in the rest of the continent. Next slide, please. So one of the requirements for accessing the market is regulatory. So we need to do two things. One, to make sure that the vaccines manufactured on the continent are up to the standard and meet the quality standards both internationally, nationally, and regionally. And at the same time, we have to ensure that we have a strong regulatory system on the continent. So as PAVM, we have been supporting and we will be supporting our national regulatory authorities so that they will have the capacity to do lot testing, lot release, and all aspects of regulation. For that, we had a meeting. We convened a meeting of WHO headquarters in Afro, AUDA and EPAD, partners, national regulatory authorities, more importantly, regional economic communities, just last week. The purpose was how to fast track the regulatory process and harmonization process on the continent. One of which, for example, is a PQ. We can't cut corners. We have to make sure that the products are PQ'd so that they will have access to the innovative financial mechanism, financing mechanism of Gavi. And we need to have strong national regulatory authorities. So we brought them together in one room and discussed what really takes for our vaccine manufacturers to go to PQ. What it takes for national regulatory authorities, those, for example, with ML3 and ML3 for vaccines, to do lot testing, lot release, and so on and so on. And then over the last year, we have been working in partnership with AUDA and EPAD to strengthen the national regulatory authorities and the harmonization process on the continent. We've done on-site visits to national regulatory authorities. We've done some sort of support, infrastructure support, specifically here for SAPRA, the South African Regulatory Authority, so that their national control laboratory will be able to do lot testing and lot release. And then we will be working very closely with other national regulatory authorities for the same purpose, to strengthen them to do the regulation on the continent. Next slide, please. Yeah, another pillar that's really a prerequisite for successful vaccine manufacturing on the continent is the workforce development. Unless we have a skilled workforce, then we're not going to go anywhere. Right now, we have close to 3,000 upper limit FTEs who are fully working in vaccine R&D and manufacturing on the continent. But for us to reach our 20-year strategy of producing 60% of our vaccines, we need close to 12,000 FTEs. So there is this big gap in terms of the existing and the required workforce for sustainable African vaccine manufacturing. So we have started supporting African manufacturers to go into a more established facilities and to get the appropriate training on vaccine manufacturing. Thanks to our collaboration with IVI last year and other institutions, both in Asia and in America, we managed to train more than 100 experts on different aspects of vaccine manufacturing. That's nowhere enough in terms of the required workforce for vaccine manufacturing. And meanwhile, we have done the competency framework. What do we need to reach to the 12,000? In what aspect of the manufacturing? And what kind of skills, expertise we need? And we have done a very comprehensive framework, and it was launched on the sidelines of the CPHIA 2023 in Lusaka last year. We have also done needs assessment. We don't want to prescribe anything as a continental strategy. Rather, we wanted to understand what kind of skill gaps manufacturers have. So we've done a needs assessment. So that will take us to how we should do the workforce development on the continent. And the final goal here is to localize training and workforce development on the continent. We don't want to keep sending our experts outside of Africa for be it practical hands-on training or theoretical training. So our final goal in here is to localize the training workforce development on the continent so that we will be self-sufficient again. Next slide, please. And then I mentioned a little bit about the input material supply chain. So we have done diagnostic of the value chain of input materials on the continent. And we have found very clear gap in terms of accessing raw materials, accessing input materials for vaccine manufacturing. And therefore, we have come up with a draft strategy for ensuring sustainable access and sustainable supply chain to raw materials and input materials on the continent. It looks like it's easier to have input materials manufacturing on the continent, but in practice, we found out that it's not as simple as we think. So we had this forum, a big forum of more than 150 people in Nairobi about 2 weeks ago. So that brought together regulatory authorities, suppliers, and all stakeholders, and some manufacturers actually, in the room. We presented our finding, and we really worked out on the potential solutions for ensuring supply chain of input materials on the continent. I would like to thank Cabinet Secretary for coming to our meeting, graciously attended our meeting, and the Kenyan government and my colleague Michael, who were really with us for 3 days, and we have done this supply chain forum successfully. Next steps is to develop this, to finalize a strategy and then implement it. One of the implementation strategies for supply chain is again localization. We need to have the vials, the syringe, the filters to be manufactured on the continent so that we will ensure our health security. So this is pretty much what we have been focusing on over the last couple of years, and the coming years we will continue working on this and also continue working on other aspects of vaccine manufacturing, including tech transfer, access to finance, and R&D. Thank you very much. Next slide, please.
So thank you, Dr. Bebe, for this update from PAVM. So the goal set forth by PAVM in its framework for action is to meet 60% of Africa's vaccine demand by 2040, and African vaccine R&D is crucial, as we have heard, to this objective and ensuring vaccine self-sufficiency across the continent. With this goal in mind, we are privileged to welcome our esteemed panelists to share their strategy and insights on Africa's vaccine R&D and manufacturing ecosystem. Their valuable contributions will play a central role in realizing sustainable vaccine production at the continental level. So I would like to join the four panelists on the stage. I would like to invite them to join me on the stage. First of all, Professor Afework Kasu Isao, Professor William Ampofo, Dr. Michael Rusiola, as well as Dr. Edwin Kansa. Please join me on the stage. All right. So let's begin with Professor William Ampofo, the Executive Director of the African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative and CEO of Ghana's National Vaccine Institute. Prof. William, could you provide insights into the key pillars of the vaccine manufacturing ecosystem necessary for achieving sustainable vaccine manufacturing in Africa, and tell us what specific measures are AVMI taking to enhance these key pillars? Prof. William?
Thank you very much for inviting us. Personally, for me, it's very exciting. Let me use that word, because as AVMI in 2016-2017 Addis Ababa, WHO did a meeting at the African Union on the success of the immunization program for meningococcal vaccine. And at that forum, at the African Union, we made the first advocacy speech for vaccine manufacturing in Africa. At that time, it was still 1%, and it is still 1%. But, you know, the scene has changed totally. I think at that time it was Uganda and Kenya, and then the minister from Ghana who asked what needed to be done to get African vaccine manufacturing started. And fast forward 2024 after COVID-19, I mean, the fact that we've gathered here as a side meeting to the 37th African Union Summit with all the wonderful speeches show that there is some strong political commitment now. And that is crucial for sustaining vaccine manufacturing in Africa. So for us at the African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative, which is made up of vaccine manufacturers, made up of scientists like me, we're very happy that we now have forum. And as Dr. Bebe just outlined, there have been a series of meetings with development partners. African Union has taken this very, very, very serious. So I think we've made significant milestones and progress in talking about vaccine manufacturing in Africa. Now, we don't just talk about vaccine manufacturing in Africa. We actually have a continental strategy, as has been outlined, the PAVM. And we've now moved from just talking about manufacturing of vaccines to manufacturing of products across the whole platform. And we know that the regulatory environment is key for that. So we at the African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative are very happy to be part of these discussions. We represent the voice of industry, and our members are very eager in the different projects across Africa to set about acquiring the necessary tech transfers, are looking for funding, are looking to WHO to facilitate the PQ process, and are looking for the market that will enable us to have a sustainable vaccine manufacturing process. So I think that at this point in time, we understand all the issues. Some of the heads of state articulated it, although some of them said they rely on us, the experts, to point them in the right direction. So having more of such fora will enable us to distill and chart the pathway that will enable the manufacturers to get the funding, will enable the regulators to be able to have the capacity to do the various things that Abebe said. And also for Kenya and Ghana, we are starting new vaccine institutes that will support private sector, that will work with the regulators, and also encourage R&D so that we will actually be able to do drug substance and do the whole process of vaccine manufacturing in Africa. So those are my comments from the African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative. Now it is clear what we need to do. The ecosystem is being defined. And so I think that working together, looking at the various challenges, starting with WHO PQ, starting with regulatory harmonization, I think we'll be able to make a strong effort to get some of the products that Africa CDC is targeting by 2040. I was very happy to see the last slide in Dr. Bebe's slide that shows some of the products that will be coming forward. I was very happy also with Dr. Jerome King's presentation about the projects in Africa that will be moving forward. And it was very significant for us that in Accra we hosted the Gavi board approval of AFMA. So things are really shaping up, and I'm sure this Addis Ababa forum will take us forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. William. Now I would like to invite Dr. Michael Luciola, CEO and Director General of Kenya Biovac Institute. Dr. Michael, could you share some insights into the current landscape of vaccine manufacturing in Kenya and elaborate on some of the key initiatives or collaborations your institute is involved to strengthen the vaccine ecosystem in Kenya and across the continent? And also, what are some of the challenges or opportunities you have encountered in this space?
Thank you, Anne, for these really interesting questions. So in Kenya today, I must mention that vaccines manufacturing has been happening in the animal vaccines front. So vaccines manufacturing as a technology is not new to us. And also you heard from the president this morning, he said we have the Kenya Medical Research Institute, we have the Institute of Primate Research, all sitting under the Ministry of Health, institutes that are carrying out significant research when it comes to, for example, vaccine preventable diseases. So in Kenya, we have experience, hands-on experience when it comes to research. We have hands-on experience when it comes to vaccines manufacturing, albeit for animals. But now we want to move to the next level where we want to focus on the human vaccines manufacturing. Today, as you heard, not just Africa, but also Kenya, we import our vaccines for primary immunization. When COVID happened, we relied heavily on imports and donations from development partners. But we want to change that narrative now. And that's why we are setting up a facility at Kenya Biovac Institute under the Ministry of Health. And as you heard in the morning, my minister's remarks, we're starting with the downstream capabilities for manufacturing, starting with fill and finish. And as we build that competence in fill and finish, go into formulation, fill and finish, and then further upstream, connecting with the Kenya Medical Research Institute, the Institute of Primate Research, and other institutes across the continent and across the globe, including with the International Vaccines Institute, to build capability in upstream capacities for vaccines manufacturing. At Biovacs, we are setting up the physical infrastructure. We are already laying down the horizontal infrastructure to support the machines and the equipment that we are hoping to receive pretty soon. We want to focus on both teen vaccines, especially the primary immunization vaccines, but also as we do that, we want to build a capability to either fill, finish, outbreak vaccines should the next pandemic happen. So that is the current landscape as we speak. We hope to maybe go into initial production around 2026, 2027, depending on how quickly we're able to put together the infrastructure. In terms of key initiatives, Anne, so we're doing a lot of work to make the physical facility ready. We have strategic partnerships and collaborations because we understand on our own we will not be able to do this. And that's why we are connected to the partnerships for Africa Vaccines Manufacturing. We are connected to Professor Mpofo at the AVMI to gather insights into how we can get to do this together. We are connected with the IVI, and today is a significant demonstration of the partnership and the collaboration that Kenya as a government, Biovacs as an institute is working hand in hand with the IVI. But also in the commercial front, we are setting up agreements and partnerships to enable technology transfer from the big manufacturers. Dr. Abebe mentioned about workforce development. Although we've been making animal vaccines, we haven't gotten the hands-on competence in human vaccines. So at Biovacs, under the Ministry of Health, we're working with the training institutions to expose our workers, our staff, our scientists to that experience of actually going into a vaccines manufacturing facility and have hands-on training experience in that regard. We're also strengthening the regulatory framework in Kenya. So we have the Pharmacy and Poisons Board, who's our regulator, and this is important for us to ensure that we have a quality product that is safe and that is effective at the end of the day. We've had a few challenges, but in those challenges we've seen opportunities. So for example, when we started, we had some financial challenges. As you know, setting up a facility for vaccines manufacturing can be quite expensive, and it's very cost intensive. So we've had to think outside the box on how to raise the funding in order to be able to build a state-of-the-art world-class facility for fill and finish. So we've made some progress in terms of financials, with strong support from the National Treasury, the Government of Kenya, the Ministry of Health, to ensure that we're able to be adequately funded, both in terms of recurrent budget, but also development budget. The other challenge has been, as mentioned, around technical competencies, both individual skills, but also the technology to be able to manufacture the vaccines. So again, as I say, these are challenges, but in those challenges we've explored the opportunities. So we've been able to engage with global vaccines manufacturers, and we're working through some tech transfer initiatives as we speak. In terms of our regulatory authority, the Pharmacy and Poisons Board is doing a lot of work to ensure that we get to the right maturity level to support vaccines manufacturing. So, and very soon, the PPB, the Pharmacy and Poisons Board, will be able to attain that level of maturity. So allow me to stop here, and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Michael. Very comprehensive feedback. I would like to introduce Professor Afiwo Kesu-Bisau, the Director General of Armario Hansen Research Institute in Ethiopia. Prof. Afiwo, could you provide insight into how vaccine R&D projects could support the development of ARIs, vaccine manufacturing capacities in Ethiopia, and realize the government of Ethiopia's goals of achieving vaccine self-reliance?
Thank you very much, Anne. I would like to thank IVI and the sponsors for giving us this opportunity to reflect on a very important continental and global agenda, vaccine self-sufficiency, self-reliance. The institute where I'm from is named Armaur Hansen Research Institute, a health research institute in existence in Africa, conducting biomedical and clinical research for the past 54 years. So the experience AHRI has spans from basic epidemiological studies to advanced vaccine related studies. So building on this, very recently the government of Ethiopia initiated high-level priorities on vaccine, and AHRI has been tasked to come up with documents for the government to enact. Therefore, in July, with support from AHRI and guidance of the ministry, we got two important regulations approved by Ethiopian government. One is Shield Vax Enterprise, an enterprise aimed at producing human vaccines under an umbrella organization called Ethio Biopharma Group. The Ethio Biopharma Group, in addition to collaborating with others, it will also work with the National Vaccine Institute, an institute which has been in existence for the past 60 years with very rich experience of producing animal vaccines. Right now, that institute produces over 20 different animal vaccines, so the experience of producing vaccines for use in animal diseases is there in Ethiopia. So the ShieldVax and NVI will collaborate under one big umbrella and move things forward. Institutions like Armaur Hansen Research Institute will have many far-reaching implications in strengthening vaccine manufacturing organizations like ShieldVax and NVI. Building on the experience of the past and also aligning with what's going on globally in the world, AHRI and other institutions can contribute a lot. To say a few words on the government's priority on ShieldVax, Ethiopia as a country was producing 6 different vaccines since 72 years ago. The technology with support from global institutions in producing human vaccines was there. Right now, we are also continuing producing one human vaccine called the rabies vaccine. On ShieldVax, our plan is to get started, as my colleagues from other countries mentioned, to get started with the fill finish activity for a couple of years, and then to move to the next level, including research and development. Talking about research and development, my institute is tasked to do the research and development activities of ShieldVax, and government prioritized around 6 different vaccines to get started with fill finish activity in the initial phase of the ShieldVax activity. Then, in collaboration with other African countries, as rightly mentioned by PAVM initiatives, we will have more vaccines for use in Africa. AHRI, Armor Hansa Research Institute, will, in line with what I've tried to touch upon, will be identifying priority pathogens and also vaccine candidates. These are tasks of research institutes. We should not just wait for those priorities to be defined by others in the years to come. By so doing, we will be able to align our priorities with the priorities of the World Health Organization, with the Africa CDC PAVM initiative, with CEPI, Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, and also Gavi. We have our own priority areas because of many endemic diseases disturbing us in Ethiopia and Africa. The northern part of Kenya and the southern part of Ethiopia, we have right now Rift Valley fever, which doesn't have vaccine. We want to collaborate by identifying disease priorities and move things forward. As mentioned again and again by previous speakers, building research and development infrastructure and talent is critically important. So institutions like AHRI will invest their time and energy in building R&D infrastructure and talent. All those cannot happen in giving us the vaccines we want unless we have a very strong regulatory system, supply chain, and distribution platforms. So institutions like AHRI, research institutions, we have a lot to contribute in making sure that African countries, including Ethiopia, will have very strong vaccine ecosystem connected from end to end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Verwerk, for your input and information. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Edwin Kansa of the Vaccine Vigilance and Clinical Trial Directorate at the Food and Drugs Authority of Ghana. As a maturity level 3 national regulatory authority, Ghana's FDA demonstrates a well-established and defined regulatory framework with a systematic approach to regulatory processes and procedures. Dr. Edwin, could you provide insight into the key success factors that have enabled Ghana FDA to reach its current level? Please.
Thank you very much. And I would like to start by thanking IVI and then funders or co-funders and sponsors of this beautiful gathering, and also extend or bring to your attention the compliments of the CEO of the Food and Drugs Authority, Dr. Delise Darko, whom I am currently standing in her shoes, big shoes, to deliver. Yes, just to touch on some few key success factors, I believe the very first one will be commitment from leadership. Leadership, institutional leadership. Leadership from the Ministry of Health. That was quite critical to ensure that all the policies that were developed were actually implemented towards achieving maturity level 3. Priorities and goals of those leadership was basically geared towards regulatory system strengthening. So that's number one. Number two, I will also want to touch on existing laws. We believe that all NRAs should strive to ensure that laws are flexible so that they can rapidly adapt whenever the need arises. So existing laws to develop policies, existing laws to develop guidelines for the NRA to actually work. Third one, I would say, is the establishment of quality management systems so that well-defined and key performance indicators can actually be derived. And then fourth, I would also want to touch on reliance and recognition. These are tools which will complement our weaknesses and also promote information sharing, basically regulatory decision making, information sharing along that lines. And finally, I think I will also want to talk about the establishment of a solid capacity building framework, both at the human resource level, infrastructure, logistics, and to promote the work of the NRA. I would like to also add the presence of an assured source of finance to run the projects of the NRA, and finally the application of a risk-based approach to regulatory decision making. And when those ingredients are in place, it facilitates regulatory system strengthening and towards the attainment of WHO maturity level 3, maturity level 4. So with your permission, I would like to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Edwin. Please allow me to go into a second round of questions. Maybe we can return to Prof. William. Prof. William, capacity building is essential for enhancing vaccine manufacturing capabilities. What strategies is AVMI employing to strengthen human resource capacity and infrastructure across African countries to support sustainable vaccine manufacturing initiatives? Please.
I think that's a very important pillar that is identified in the African program, in the PAVM Centers of Excellence for Training, and also identifying suitable models. I think we've had some progress with that. I know that the GIZ has done some surveys, and we actually hosted a meeting in Ghana to review what would be the appropriate models. Africa CDC and WHO, we heard from Dr. Jerome King, we've had close to over 5,000 people already trained in vaccinology. And I know that this year, several colleagues are also applying to the biotechnology courses that IVI and the Wright Foundation are hosting. We're also looking at establishing some of these back home. And also, I know that my own University of Ghana is developing a vaccinology course, looking at biotechnology models. I know that our colleagues in Rwanda are also looking at establishing, similar programs. So across Africa, we have identified the need for training. I was very impressed when we were in Morocco. We realized that Morocco had already trained a significant number of technical staff to support the biomanufacturing program. So we are making progress on that. And probably what we also need to do is something that Jerome mentioned, which is, once we have the tech know-how, or when we have the capacity in the factories, but for R&D, we need to find a gap. We need to bridge that gap where we translate the research findings now. These candidate vaccines can then be, looked at commercially, and then we can actually have commercial production. And this has to be a continuous process. And we're looking for partnerships that will, share the knowledge and also train our people so that they will be receptive and also move on and actually find appropriate models of training and capacity building for us in Africa. So this is a very important subject, biotechnology training, research capacity building that is actually happening now We are thankful to Africa CDC for having supported some of these trainings. USP has also done some of the trainings. We look forward to more partnerships to move this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. William. Dr. Michael, in the context of vaccine infrastructure development and market shaping, how does the Kenya Biovaccine Institute collaborate with stakeholders such as governments, international organizations, and manufacturers to ensure equitable access to vaccine?
Thank you, Anne, for the question around infrastructure development. And just to reiterate that it's very costly to set up a vaccines manufacturing facility from scratch. And that's where collaborations and partnerships are really key. So in Kenya today, as I mentioned earlier, we are setting up the horizontal infrastructure, if you like, that supports then the machinery and the equipment that will come later. So we are making sure that we have all the plants, the machinery, the water treatment, effluent management, all that is being laid down as we speak, so that we have a solid infrastructure to support the vaccines manufacturing effort. And we're working with partners both in terms of financials, in terms of the machines, the equipment. We're looking at what other players have done before so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And that has really speeded up the whole process. So in terms of the machines, we are looking to get at least 2 filling lines so that we're able to achieve the capacity that we require to satisfy not just the local demand, but we're looking at the region, we're looking at Africa, we're looking at being able to contribute to the PAVM efforts so that we are a key player in supporting the continent in attaining self-sufficiency. Cold chain is also quite important, the distribution network. Again, we have a very robust supplies management agency in Kenya under the Ministry of Health, and we intend to plug into that distribution network including cold chain management for both the raw materials and the finished product. And then, as Professor William had mentioned, it's about commercialization. We want to make sure that as we make these vaccines, we're able to push them out into the marketplace so that it makes sense to manufacture locally. Your question on market shaping, and yes, Kenya, we're doing a lot to be players in the continental effort around market shaping. Obviously, within Kenya itself, we know the demand for the human vaccines. We have already done comprehensive studies to look at the feasibility of this effort. So we know what our demand is. We know how much of our budget is set aside for human vaccines for the primary immunization program, and we have to again plug into that local demand. But also importantly, we want to be regional players. We want to be able to support Ethiopia as they set up their own facility, Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania. And in that small East African community, we want to be players so that there's no duplication of effort, but instead there is complementarity so that what we are able to manufacture complements what Ethiopia, what Rwanda, what Uganda, Tanzania is manufacturing. And then when you look at the continental map, as I said, we are working very closely with the PAVM to market shape the continent, again to avoid duplication and to make this effort financially sound. And just finally to mention that we are also working very closely with the as partners, as players, as contributors to what Gavi is putting together in terms of accelerate the AVM accelerator. So at the last meeting in Marrakesh, we were participants in those conversations around how can we contribute to the continental effort, but also how can we benefit from this accelerator opportunity that is being offered by Gavi. So we want to be really supportive. We want to start with the fill and finish and benefit from the accelerator effort at Gavi, and also in the future go into drug substance and again benefit from that effort. I think finally is just to mention about offtake. So locally, we are working within the ministry to assure that we have guaranteed offtake from BioVax. But again, it's important to look at the whole continent and see how best we can ensure that vaccines get into people's arms and not stay on the shelf. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Professor Afuwok, ARI has been at the forefront of infectious disease research in Ethiopia. Collaboration and partnerships are essential for advancing vaccine research initiatives. Could you highlight some successful collaboration ARI has established with national and international partners to drive vaccine research projects, particularly in epidemiology research to respond to infectious disease and public health threats in Ethiopia and beyond Ethiopia?
Thank you, and again, ARI is an example of collaboration by itself. When established 54 years ago, it was a collaborative effort among NORAD, Norway, SIDA, Sweden, University of Bergen, and government of Ethiopia. So because of its nature, over the past 5 decades, ARI has been collaborating nationally and internationally for its research and development endeavors. Exemplary collaborative research endeavors nationally followed what we call the triple helix model. ARI, as a research institute, has been collaborating with higher education institutions and government bodies. As a research wing of the Ministry of Health, ARI picks research priority areas from government, from the ministry, and connects those areas with its collaborators in work toward this action. Exemplary collaborations are with the Ethiopian Biotechnology Institute and the National Veterinary Institute on cholera vaccine development using local isolate. This is an ongoing collaborative study. By so doing, we'll be building our local capacity. With universities like Addis Ababa University, Gondar University, Jimma University, and other universities in Ethiopia, ARI was collaborating and is collaborating on diverse areas. Exemplary among them are collaboration on meningococcal meningitis. In Africa, we have a very long meningitis belt spanning from Senegal to all the way to East Africa. So we have repeated outbreaks, so we have been collaborating on that area with our universities. And also on human papillomavirus research and development endeavors with our universities. Arboviruses, as I've tried to touch upon earlier, are also putting us in trouble. So we are collaborating with universities in some parts of Ethiopia so that we can understand the epidemiology, disease burden, and come up with some foundation for our next moves. With Public Health Institute, I'm very happy the DG of the Ethiopian Public Health Institute is here. We collaborate on various survey and surveillance related activities, including COVID-19, rabies vaccine effectiveness, on measles surveillance and outbreak investigation, and the like. Many international collaborations. Exemplary has been our collaboration with the Norwegian Institute of Public Health, where we established very strong capacity on meningococcal meningitis and other vaccine-related endeavors. Right now, we also are collaborating with NIPH on Bactivac initiative on vaccine for gonococcus. So these are exemplary collaborations. Another very strong collaboration, international collaboration we have is with International Vaccine Institute, IVI, over a decade now, where we have been collaborating on cholera vaccine development, implementation, and other activities. We are also collaborating with them with the Ethiopian Cholera Elimination Initiative, EECP, and many others. Ladies and gentlemen, IVI chose Ethiopia, and from Ethiopia, Armor Hansen Research Institute, to have the third IVI collaborating center in Africa after Ghana and Madagascar. Through that initiative, we have many collaborations going on, not only on research and development, but also on talent development. Our researchers and technicians and experts from different institutions, including from AHRI, are picked and getting training on advanced vaccinology and GXP courses in Seoul, Korea. We are very much grateful for that. We also have others, very strong collaborations with international partners, with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. When COVID hit Africa and the world, one of the challenges we had was to establish the genomic capacity in Ethiopia and in Ethiopia. So we collaborated with BMGF, EPHI, to build that capacity in Ethiopia. That's another exemplary collaboration. With Africa CDC on pathogen genomics and surveillance. With WHO, we have been collaborating on various research networks and capacity building initiatives. Ethiopia is an investor for Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, one of the first African countries to sit as an investor for CEPI. So those national and international and continental collaborations are critically important to move the vaccination agenda to the next level. So AHRI wants to strengthen the existing collaborations and initiate new collaborations so that we can achieve what we want to achieve in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Afiwork. Dr. Edwin, could you share Ghana FDA's plan to support other countries on the continent to strengthen their NRA and advise what further steps are needed for other NRAs to achieve maturity level 3? Please.
Thank you very much. It has always been one of the corporate vision of the FDA to Ghana FDA to become a global center for regulatory excellence, and in that the FDA continuously position itself to continuously build capacity of its regulators so that when the time is up for us to offer support, we can actually do that. So before even developing a concept paper and a proposal to become a training hub for regulators in Africa, the FDA has developed training materials to cover clinical trials, to cover marketing authorization, to cover vigilance with the support from partners. And then, as you may be aware, we are currently the Regional Center of Regulatory Excellence for Vaccines. And this covers all the functional areas, with the exception of lot release of vaccines. So to put some numbers to these efforts, the FDA under the outer NEPAT ARCO umbrella has actively trained regulators from the continent. I think over 70 of them, from about 16 countries, since 2017. The FDA, together with the African Collaborative Center, has also trained over 200 pharmacovigilance persons from the continent and in Ghana. Together with that, we've also opened our doors to regulators from the sister agencies to come in to familiarize, observe what we do, and to support them in their, mentor them basically at their various NRAs. At the regional level, we are active players at the West Africa Regional Joint Assessment Procedure, where we lead some of the teams and also basically to promote and share our knowledge and expertise. I would like to touch on this particular issue. I think we've been talking about capacity building of regulators on the continent. I think what we may also have to look out for is how to retain these persons on the continent. Across board, there is a huge attrition where regulators are leaving after they have been trained extensively. So I think there should be the strategic program to retain regulators who actually train, because if we can't retain them, this vision of local vaccine manufacturing for the continent will not we will struggle to achieve that. So that is what the FDA have done, and I believe that other sister NRAs can follow suit by developing their systems and structures and developing strategies to continuously build the human capacity of the establishment, and also we will encourage them to form strategic partnerships with NRAs, designated maturity level 3, maturity level 4, or the World Health Organization listed, and also strategic partnerships with partners who are interested in building their regulatory systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Edwin. So lastly, let me pose the same question to each of you, and we don't need to keep the same order. So the last question is, what resources and action are necessary for the implementation of end-to-end vaccine research and development projects? How can we effectively connect all the elements of this process? What challenges do we anticipate in achieving this integration? So I don't know, who wants to tackle first that last question?
Thank you. Thank you. And for effective action, we need resources. For me and for us, the major resources for R&D and for the value chain as a whole primarily are financial resources. For us in Africa, our heads of state and government, they passed a law and signed agreement many years ago for countries to invest about 1% of their annual GDP for research and development. So we need government funding primarily to address our financial resource needs. We also need in Africa the private sector to come and collaborate with the public sector on research, development, and manufacturing. We also need increased grants from international organizations to support our financial needs. If we get those, I think we can easily move forward. The other is the human resource. The human resource is critically important. When presented by my colleague, Dr. Abebe, what we have in Africa right now is very far from the number of intellectuals, the talent we need, not only for research and development, but also for manufacturing. We need investment on human resource development across the value chain for all kinds of the human resources required. Infrastructure is another important resource. We have very few research and development and manufacturing infrastructure for vaccine R&D and manufacturing in Africa. That's again another area where we need large amount of resources. Another one is on knowledge, on data. Data generated in some parts of Africa are important resources. We need to have a continental mechanism when we can share data generated in one part of Africa for use in the other parts. On actions, because we are just beginning, or because we are at different levels, we need very strong national mechanisms, platforms that will bring together different stakeholders so that they can discuss and fill gaps on vaccine local manufacturing, on R&D, and etc. We also need local strategies, national strategies to move our things forward. Therefore, it's always important to identify priorities and also target pathogens. We need to have a mechanism to optimize vaccine candidates by our own. We need to also have very strong clinical trials capacity. We have very few institutions in Africa with very strong clinical trials capacity. We need to have very focused action on that area. So to connect the actions with the resources, we need the mechanisms I've tried to mention earlier. If we have those national mechanisms where platforms to come together and discuss, and also very strong strategy to put things forward, and also a communication strategy. When it comes to vaccine, there are misunderstandings and hesitancies as we faced during COVID. So very strong communication strategy and mechanism and collaboration is critically important. On challenges anticipated, challenges on the resources, funding, limitations could be challenges. The human resource capacity could be another challenge. Technology transfer, we need to collaborate with institutions in the West for appropriate technology transfer. Regulatory hurdles, as my colleague has been mentioning, strong regulatory framework is important, strong regulatory capacity, and going to the WHO pre-qualification, the maturity level, etc., are critically important for us in Africa. Market is also critically important, as stated nicely by speakers before me. So if we connect the resources with the action areas, and we can easily address the challenges and achieve the targets we want to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Fumik. Dr. Edwin, I can see you are ready to address that question.
Yes, thank you very much. I think critical among them will be reorient the mindsets of governments to facilitate, to more or less formulate and promulgate policies which will make R&D competitive, and basically tax reliefs and then incentives for R&D. Just to share some few figures, most of these R&D institutions in our continent, common antibodies for research, we have to import them. Common reagents are imported, and these imports have tariffs you need to pay, import duties and things. So retention of researchers, remunerations needs to be improved. So basically the space needs to be more or less made favorable and competitive, so that the R&D space will be improved and become attractive. That's number one. The other item will be to strengthen the regulator, so that data and the integrity and quality of clinical research data will be assured. And also at the end of the vaccine research and development, the output, which happens to be a vaccine, the quality will be assured, and through lot testing and then lot release. Again, there should be a centralized, coordinated effort at the country level, at the regional level, and at the global, continental level, so that players, stakeholders, basically researchers, policymakers, regulators can come together, share ideas, communicate, and then complement each other's work. That is quite critical, so that we wouldn't spend more time reinventing the wheel. And then finally, I see a situation whereby there should be assured market for the output of the end-to-end research and development. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Edwin. Dr. Michael, any thoughts on the same question, please?
Yeah, thank you, Anne, for that really good question. And for us in Kenya, for us in Kenya Biovacs, I think it's the standard resources required response, money and people to do the work and get the technology transferred. But one thing that we in Kenya have really benefited from, and which I really wanted to state it here, is the leadership and the commitment and the political will. That's a resource that we often take for granted. I think we in Kenya, just by today's event, you can see that we have that commitment right from the top. The president is passionate about local manufacturing, and we do not take that passion for granted. Importantly, under the Ministry of Health, our Cabinet Secretary for Health, Dr. Pula, is also very passionate about local manufacturing, about universal health coverage, and that is support, that is a resource that we tap into to just get us to where we want to get to the next level. Importantly also, under that commitment is the political goodwill, and I'm happy to say that even today we were joined by the chairman of the Health Committee of the National Assembly from Kenya. They're very supportive about this initiative, and I'd like to appreciate Dr. Robert Bukose for being with us here today. So that is an important resource to tap into, and that's what has really pushed us forward. As I said, financial, we're in a good place that we've been able to get some support from development partners, but we could always do with more financial support. So anyone with a few coins in the back pocket, we'll be happy to receive. Human resource capacity is also critical. As Prof. William had mentioned, we want to develop our people in biomanufacturing. So in Kenya today, we are working with the Kenya Medical Research Institute in biomanufacturing training. So again, that human resource, the skill set that's required to go into biomanufacturing is really critical. And of course, the technology transfer. We need to be able to get to the antigen itself. We need to be able to have access to the drug substance, the drug product, the technology that will manage that agent in order to translate it from the test tube into a syringe, into a vial, to be able to be injected into patients. So those are critical resources that I would like to share with you today. We have and we're benefiting from. I think, Anne, if you allow me to just go through the actions needed, I think that is also a part of your question. You asked about that. So I think for us, we want to accelerate the physical infrastructure setup, and that is something that is really a priority for us. We want to be able to get to that level that we can fill and finish and have that vial and proudly show it that we can do it as a country, we can do it as a continent. And then just to mention, apart from all the others, it's the regulatory requirement. I think without the right regulatory environment, the right regulatory framework, we may struggle in terms of safe, quality vaccines coming out. So again, in terms of actions, we're working very closely with the Pharmacy and Poisons Board under the same Ministry of Health to make sure that we get to the right maturity level. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Michael. Prof. William, some thoughts? Thank you.
So let me wear two hats. First, as the CEO of the National Vaccine Institute in Ghana, because I think we took the unique strategy of having a legal framework for our National Vaccine Institute. And I think this is a very important strategy. So the government will change, the leadership will change, but the National Vaccine Institute is set in law. And the pillars of our roadmap are the same as for the vaccine PAVM. So we have the partnerships with the Continental Program, and also understanding the regional economic focus. So working with ECOWAS. So those things are very important. Having the national program aligned with the regional program and the continental program. So that's one. And then also looking at Ghana, we went the route of empowering the private sector. So although private sector makes the vaccines, it's the government that buys the vaccine. So the other critical aspect is to ensure that it's not just the market per se, but that demand is guaranteed for the private sector to become sustainable. That way, should there be a pandemic, then we have a facility that can make vaccines. I mean, when I used to serve with WHO influenza pandemic preparedness, we used to hear a tale of woe from Serum Institute. They were making influenza vaccines and the Indian government was not buying. Fast forward, because that facility was there, come COVID-19, Serum Institute became a very major supplier of vaccines worldwide. So those are important lessons that we need to learn from. And for us now at AVMI, we think that we serve an important role in communicating the issues and serving as the mouthpiece of industry. So all these, we all know what is the problem now, but how to fashion the ecosystem, how to ensure that there are linkages, how to ensure that continental free trade, which is sitting in Accra, will enable vaccines made in South Africa, Kenya, Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, to crisscross to where they are needed and in the right manner and through, the pathways. When we were in Nairobi recently, the supply chain issue was, the challenge of supply chain was very clear. So I'm very happy that all these issues are coming to the fore, and it is such forum that will enable us to share the information, to evolve their strategies. And one thing we've realized in Ghana is that we better get our people to understand these vaccines we say we are going to make locally. During COVID-19, a lot of people were hesitant about the mRNA vaccines. Now we look at it as a tool that we can use to make yellow fever and Lassa fever going forward. So the other thing we are doing in Ghana, which we should do on a continental basis, is to get our people to understand that vaccines made in Africa will be good, they will be quality, and we should educate and communicate so that the uptake will go with the demand. So these are things that I think we really need to understand and incorporate into the ecosystem as we move forward. And I thank you very much for this opportunity to share these thoughts.
Thank you, Prof. William. So I would like to thank our esteemed panelists for their valuable information, insightful commentary. Please give them a round of applause.
Thanks to President Ruto and the government of Kenya for sponsoring and hosting this event. Thanks to the Cabinet Secretary for Health, Wafula, who really was the driving force within the Kenyan government to help bring us here today. Thank the workforce from the Ministry of Health of Kenya and of IVI for putting together the event itself, which I know was a tremendous amount of work. And then finally, thanks to the panelists for the very informing discussion that we had, led by the moderator, Dr. Anwar Tel. So, quickly to summarize, I think the discussion today really emphasizes the need for an approach that not only takes the tremendous work that the leadership of PAVM, the African Union, and individual national governments have done to ensure that Africa is not in a position that it was in at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, which is to be completely dependent on outside sources or on the mercy or sympathy of others for vaccines which are critical to protect the population in Africa. I think we learned that, and I think we see throughout the continent efforts to strengthen and reinforce different aspects of vaccine manufacturing and development. What we would like to do, and I think what the case that has been made by many of the speakers, is that this isn't only about manufacturing or only about regulatory, but it's moving these products through a system that works. And in order to have a functioning ecosystem, we're going to need to have, and start with, robust leadership, funding for research and development, funding for regulatory agencies that will monitor the research and development, funding for manufacturing, funding for the regulation of those manufacturers, then a mechanism to procure and then to implement. And we've heard this then in different ways from Director General Jean Kaseya and Dr. Bebe, who spoke about the leadership that the Africa CDC has provided and that remarkable update of vaccine manufacturing on the continent, which I think is really critical, because as we look at these activities and the timelines, we're seeing that there is a future that has African manufactured vaccines protecting people here on the continent. From the AU Commissioner for Health, again, a very important statement that vaccines are not necessarily the only solution. They're an important, critical part of the broad agenda for health that the African Union has to commit to. Because as much as I'm concerned about infectious diseases, non-communicable diseases are going to be an increasing problem as Africa develops. Again, from the Cabinet Secretary, I think that it was a really clear statement. The case has been made, and a commitment has been made for vaccine manufacturing and the success of vaccine manufacturing. It starts with leadership and funding, and it ends with vaccines that are implemented through national health systems. And all of this is going to be important if these industries are going to be robust and sustainable. I'm going to come back to President Ruto because I'm going to end with one of the things that he talked about. But he really talked about mobilizing investment, removing the restrictions to the distribution, trade of vaccines and intellectual property. Because vaccines are global public goods, and they need to move in a way that facilitates good health for all. From the IVI perspective, again, we're about developing vaccines. And when we develop vaccines, either the vaccines that we develop ourselves or vaccines that we work on with other companies or universities to develop, we think from end to end. We think from the inception in the laboratory to the finish when the vaccines are implemented through national programs, and all the things that go in between, and it's difficult to separate that from having sustainable manufacturing in Africa. And I think that was our critical point. Our global council, so the council of all the member states of IVI, supported this idea of using projects to drive a sustainable manufacturing. Our board heard that message from the Global Council and also endorsed this concept of that's now known as AVIC Africa, but also very importantly assigned support for IVI establishing a regional office to help to develop within Africa the capabilities that we talk about. And again, and IVI is guilty of it also. We come here and we do a project and then we leave. What we would really like to do in the next phase is work with Africa CDC, with PAVM, with the national governments of different countries to create something that is intrinsically African, so that when we talk about discovery, development, and delivery of new vaccines, all of that can happen here. And so IVI is committed to sharing what we have, whether it is standard operating procedures, whether it's technology, whether it's policy or evidence generating support or data sharing or other IT related things. We are committed to doing that, and to doing that without any licensing fees or patents if we can. And that's been the way that IVI has dealt with its technology transfers of different vaccines. And again, to realize that technology transfer has many meanings. It isn't only sending a vaccine to a company to be filled and finished or to be manufactured, but it has to do with a vaccine that comes out of our laboratory or a laboratory here in Africa. For instance, the Rift Valley fever vaccine that Kemry helped to develop with Oxford University. That vaccine has to be technology transferred to a company, now a company in Africa, that can make it. So technology transfer is a broader concept that has to do with the way vaccines are developed and ultimately manufactured. So finally, I'd like to come back to President Ruto. I hope that at the end of this session, and maybe in the future, because that's what vaccine manufacturing is going to be about, we are going to look forward to this meeting as a way to remember that we determined a boldness of vision, a firmness of commitment, and an impact of success. And if those are the criteria that we're going to use to judge the success of this side event, then I think those are the right criteria and something to work for in the future. So we look forward to working with all of you on sustainable vaccine manufacturing on the continent. Thank you.